Hello guys, welcome to my tutorials corner. My name is Abhi and this is part 23 of WPF tutorial for beginners. In this video we are going to learn about the DataGrid control in WPF. So what is DataGrid control? The DataGrid control is an UI control which is used to display the data in tabular format. This is a widely used UI control which is basically used to display a list of objects. So if you will notice here on the slide, there is a DataGrid control which has different columns like employee ID, name, email, phone, age, website, and is permanent employee. Now here if you will see, these are the different properties of a DataGrid control. This is the AutoGenerateColumns property, which is used to generate the columns automatically. So you just have to provide the data source for the DataGrid control and all it will do automatically. So let's go ahead and open up the Visual Studio and let's look at this with an example. I am going to create a DataGrid control. To create that, you can simply drag the DataGrid control from here, or you can write your own XML. So I'm going to write my XML here, DataGrid, and let's give it a meaningful name, Grid Employees. Let's close that. Now I'm going to open the code window, and here, just to boost up the things, I have already written some code. I'm going to simply copy this from here and I will paste on the window. Okay, now I'm going to create a private function here which is basically going to provide the data source for the DataGrid control that we have just created here. So let's do that. Private void fill employees. Let's close that, and I'm going to simply copy this code from here and I will paste it inside the fill employees function. Let's paste that. Now let's talk about this code. This code is basically creating a list of employees. So while creating the list, I have added 3 employees here, that is Todd, Rob, and Jack. So these employees have their own different values of the properties. You can see there is employee ID 101, 102, and 103. Similarly, they have the different names, email, phone, age, and website. Okay, so let's go to the slide and let's talk about the AutoGenerateColumns property. Basically, when we create the DataGrid control and till we have not provided any value to this AutoGenerateColumns property, that is by default set to true. So if this property is set to true, the DataGrid control is going to display the values which are of numeric type or string type as a label control. You can see here, this is the integer value, this is a string value, and this is also a string value. Also, it displays a hyperlink for the URI type, and it displays a checkbox for those property which are of Boolean type. So if the property is of URI type, this is going to display a hyperlink, and if the property is of type Boolean, this is going to display a checkbox, and it will mark that checkbox if it is true, and this is going to unmark that checkbox if the value is false. So basically in this example I have already a URI type here, and I have also a property of type boolean. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, I will provide the item source for the DataGrid control. So let's do that. Grid employees dot items source is equals to the employees. Let's do that. Now what I'm going to do, I will simply call this method into the constructor. Let's do that. Fill employees. If I will run this code, this is going to bind this list of employees to the DataGrid control. So let's do that. Run it, and you can see the output as expected. Now let's talk about the properties that we have here. We have seen the auto-generated columns. The next property is CanUserReorderColumns. Let's go to the code here and let's run it again. CanUserReorderColumns. What is meant by that? If you will notice here, I'm going to simply drag this property from here to just before the employee ID. You can see the columns exchanged with their position. Okay, so that is basically the managed through CanUserReorderColumns. So if this property is set to true, this is going to allow you to reorder the columns. So by default this property is set to true. If I will set this to false, you will not be able to reorder the columns. So let's go ahead and set that to false. Can user reorder the columns, and let's mark that as false. If I will run this code now, if I will try to reorder this column, that facility is no longer available here. So that's basically the CanUserReorder the columns property. The next property is CanUserResize the columns. As its name says, that if we want to increase the width of the column, then can we do that? So let's go to our example. If you will notice here, as soon as I'm moving my mouse cursor to the line, this is displaying arrow here, which is basically saying that if you want to increase the width of this column, you can simply drag the mouse and it will increase that column's width. So basically this is managed through this property, that is CanUserResizeColumns. So by default this property also set to true. So if I will set this to false, I will not be able to resize the columns. Now the next property is CanUserSortColumns. Basically this property is set to true by default. So let's go to the example. If I will run this code, and when I will click on this header, that is employee ID, so this is going to sort this list on the basis of the employee ID. So let's click on that, and first of all automatically it shows the data as it is. So when you will click on this property, this is going to arrange the records inside the data grid. First it will display in ascending order, then it will display in descending order. So that's basically the CanUserSortColumns property. The next property is ColumnWidth. So if you want to set the width of column, you can simply go to DataGrid Control, and here we can specify the width of the column. Let's do that. Column width and maybe 200. So this is going to set the width of all columns to 200. You can see all the columns are equally shown. That's the column width. Similarly, this is the property which is used to manage the height of a column. Now the next property is GridLinesVisibility. This property is used to set the visibility of these grid lines. You can see here, this is the grid lines of employee ID, this is the grid line of name. So basically these grid lines are used to separate the columns from each other. So there are different types of visibility of grid lines. So let's go ahead and check that. Grid lines visibility. If I will set this to horizontal, this is going to display the lines horizontally. So let's go ahead and actually let's get rid of this. Now if I will run this code, this is going to display the grid lines horizontally, and if I will set this to vertical, this is going to display only the vertical grid lines. Okay, so that's basically the grid lines visibility property. The next property is headers visibility. This is the header of a data grid control. So if we will set this property to true, then this is going to display these headers, and if we will set this to false, then this is going to hide this header. Okay, so that's the header visibility property. Now one thing you need to keep in mind is that you can bind any data source that implements enumerable interface. So before doing that, please make sure that the data source which you are providing to the data grid control as item source is implementing the enumerable interface. Okay, so that's it from this video tutorial. In the next video tutorial, we will understand about the selection mode and selection units. With that, we will understand that how we can display the details view in a data grid. This is my blog where you can find the code. So that's it from this video tutorial. Please like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.